Hi. I don't know. Indistinct. You never know. I once said to a friend who was going into surgery, I walked him to the operating room, and he said to me, "If I don't make it, I'll signal you from the other side." And I said to him, "Make it unambiguous."
Oh, boy. That's a good one.
That is a good one, isn't it?
You and Bob, you just have it right there.
I don't know about that. Bob certainly does.
I just want to tell you how helpful last week's session on the family
Oh, family.
was for me.
Oh, good. Oh, I'm so glad. Yeah, it's a powerful narrative, isn't it? Yeah. We're all in families.
For better or worse.
I was talking to somebody yesterday about an issue between a mother and a daughter, and this person said to me, this was not the mother, but a friend. Mothers and daughters. And then she said, fathers and sons. The family dynamic. It's real.
Oh, it is.
All right, very good. Sorry?
So tough about Rome.
Yeah, I will. Yeah, I will a little bit. Yeah. Okay, good morning. Shabbat Shalom. Good to see everybody this morning. Looks like winter has come. We're glad about this. Okay, as some of you know, Roman Friedman passed away earlier this week. Roman was a very special guy, devoted to the temple, devoted to Judaism, devoted to his friends, humble. He had a vocation. I don't know whether he would put it in such highfalutin terms, but that we never forget the Holocaust and all that it signified and all the consequences of it, and he really devoted his life to being sure that that narrative remained alive, not only for its own sake, but in terms of how human beings can act to one another in an exalted way and in a terrible way. I think in this regard of Genesis chapter 1, we are human beings created on the same day as animals, sixth day, and also the image of God. So in this sense, we are, to use a lovely German word, Zwischenmenschen. We're in between. And though the animals and the stars and the heavenly bodies all move, but don't move in terms of deliberation, they don't think about it, we have a chance to think about it, and therefore we have a choice, and the choice is, I guess to put it in those schematic terms of Genesis 1, to rise high or to fall very low. And the Holocaust certainly reflects the low. But Roman was devoted to getting us to rise high and not to sink low. And aside from all of these things, he was an extremely sweet human being. Wonderful smile, warm smile. One of his daughters reminded me that almost 15 years ago when we celebrated his 70th birthday, I spoke at that birthday celebration, and among the other things that I said about Roman was that, and some of you who knew him well will recognize this, whenever he engaged in conversation, he regularly went like this. as if he couldn't, the words and the thoughts weren't enough to get him involved with the other people. He had to somatize it. He had to put it on his body. And I'd forgotten that I did that, but she reminded me. And that was another aspect of Roman, wasn't it? He wanted connection and did it very wonderfully. So it's a big loss for those of us who loved him and those of us who didn't know him well but recognized his special attributes. So why don't we pause just for a moment and remember Roman. Okay. Well, welcome, and welcome to those who are live streaming. We're very glad to have you. Today we begin, and at this point Roman will be raising his hand because he recognized that I'm about to launch into Torah and I forgot the blessing. So I'm allowing Roman now to remind me internally. So let's do our blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. We praise you, Lord our God, sovereign of the universe, who sanctifies us through God's commandments, enjoining upon us the obligation to immerse ourselves in words of Torah. Amen. I play a little game with myself that I think I've talked about from time to time, and that is talking about in any genre the greatest. The greatest composers. I'm asking myself, who are the top 5? And I play that little game with myself. Who are the greatest poets? Who are the greatest philosophers? What is the greatest book of the Bible? Of course, there are candidates. There are many candidates for it. The book of Isaiah, in its fullness, according to one famous brand of scholarship, there are 3 Isaiahs, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd. Some editor put them together. That hypothesis is under assault at this moment, but the first Isaiah is pre-exilic, Isaiah is exilic, and 3rd Isaiah is post-exilic. So we get a prophetic expression of 3 important periods in biblical history. Isaiah is certainly a candidate. Genesis is a candidate. It lays foundations and gives us a sense of the shape, the structure of the universe and of human action. We spent a year on Deuteronomy and the Deuteronomic histories, where Deuteronomy is kind of Janus-like. Janus is the god of the doorways, who looks both outside and inside 2 ways, and Deuteronomy looks back to the first 4 books of Genesis, summarizes them. It purports to be a repetition of the laws, but in fact is quite creative about them. And Deuteronomy also serves as a foundation for the histories, the 6 histories that follows. So Isaiah, Genesis, Deuteronomy, maybe the book of Psalms also is one of the great fundamental books. This morning when I got up, I asked myself the same question and came up with a different answer. Exodus. Also one of the pivotal books of the Bible, isn't it? The book of Exodus deals with the issue of liberation in 2 forms, negative liberation and positive liberation. We have liberation from, freedom from bondage in the first 15 chapters of the book of Exodus. But when you think about it, freedom from is, though crucial, a clearing of the ground, clearing away the debris of tyranny. But once we've cleared the ground, what are we going to do on that ground? So there's also positive liberation, the creation of one's own life according to one's own values, aspirations, history, and so on. And positive liberation in the book of Exodus takes two forms: the creation of law and institutions, and the creation of ritual. Laws and institutions made according to one's own values give shape, structure, continuity, durability to a community. As long as there is some flexibility in how one applies the law and transforms institutions to accommodate new times, continuity and change, both very, very important. You have a constitution, but you're able to interpret it. You have a Torah, but you're able to interpret it. You have judges, and you're able to give them ongoing, in a certain way, continuous tasks and new tasks. So institutions and law help to create positive freedom, on the metaphor of clearing the ground and what are we going to do on it. Laws and institutions are the products of building a community. There's also ritual. So we find law beginning in Exodus chapter 20, and then we find ritual beginning in Exodus 35, and for the last 16 chapters of the book, Exodus 25 through 40. I was thinking about this on the way over. There's a lot of scholarship and meditation on the whole question of ritual and its meaning. There is the famous author Mircea Eliade, who was a strong exponent of what he called the myth and ritual school. That ritual is really a restatement in different form of the myths of a community. Myths in the sense of what's our story? And the ritual is a way of retelling that story with emotion, with song, with intensity. Myth first, ritual comes to do something with it, to keep the story alive. There's also the sociological or anthropological theory of Victor Turner, in which he thinks that ritual is a way of forming what he calls communitas, rich, durable communities. We come together as individuals in a community through ritual. There are other forms of understanding ritual too, but just think about it, that the ritual gives us a chance to keep our story alive, and it also gives us a chance to keep the story alive together. So what we have in Exodus are three forms of freedom, liberation. Liberation from bondage, liberation to create the laws and institutions that form a society, and also to engage in a ritual which reinforces the story and brings us together. And not just in a formal way, but in a deeply emotional way as well. So if there's some plausibility in what I've just said, Exodus is for sure, one of the major books of the Bible. And if you want to push it the way I do, just to tantalize myself, the most important book in the Bible. One of the nice things about what I do, I must say, is I go for broke. Who's the greatest composer? Oh, come on, Schubert. And then I live with it and see whether or not it continues to work. And I know there's Bach hanging out in the corner, waiting to be called to the center, right? Or Mozart or Beethoven. So it's a nice way of having a conversation with yourself about, who and in what way rises to the top. Okay. So with that in mind, let's turn to the beginning of Exodus, which is our Torah portion for this week. And we want to look at the richness of this Torah portion, which goes to where? Chapter 6, verse 2. So, I want to start reading and make some comments about it. So these are the names of the sons of Israel. Israel is Jacob, the other name of Jacob, who came to Egypt with Jacob, each coming with his household. Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, Benjamin, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. The total number of persons that were of Jacob's issue came to 70, Joseph being already in Egypt. Joseph died, and all his brothers, and all that generation. But the Israelites were fertile and prolific. They multiplied and increased very greatly, so the land was filled with them. Okay, so this is a very rich set of verses. Let's explore it a little bit. So first of all, I want to go back to some Genesis passages. First, Genesis 46. Genesis 46, verses 8. These are the names of the Israelites, Jacob and his descendants who came to Egypt. Jacob's firstborn Reuben, Reuben's sons Enoch, Palu, Hetzron, Carmi, Simeon, Simeon's sons Yemuel, Yamin, and so on and so on. So what we have here is a genealogy, a list of each of Jacob's sons and their descendants. Let's look next at chapter 35, verse 23. 35:23. Now the sons of Jacob were 12. Now the sons of Jacob were 12 in number. The sons of Leah, Reuben, Jacob's firstborn, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, the sons of Rachel, and so on and so on. This undoubtedly, and not chapter 46, is the list to which Exodus is referring. The sons only and not the sons with their genealogies. So that the book of Exodus is carrying forward something that is intimated here in Genesis 35. Let's go back to chapter 46. All we've done so far is to compare two lists in Genesis and their relationship to the Exodus list. 46, verse 27. All the persons belonging to Jacob who came to Egypt, his own issue aside from the wives of Jacob's sons, all these persons numbered 66. And Joseph's sons who were born to him in Egypt were 2 in number. Thus the total of Jacob's household who came to Egypt was 70 persons. And we see exactly the same thing in Exodus chapter 1, verse 5. The total number of persons that were of Jacob's issue came to 70, Joseph being already in Egypt, okay? So the author of the first verses of Exodus is pulling forward what we see in the book of Genesis. I want to go back now to 35 and look at verse 11. Verse 9, God appeared to Jacob on his arrival from Padam Aram. He blessed him. God said to him, you whose name is Jacob, you shall be called Jacob no more, but Israel shall be your name. Thus he named him Israel, and God said to him, I am El Shaddai, be fertile and increase. A nation, yea, an assembly of nations shall descend from you. Kings shall issue from your loins. Okay? So this is a prediction of great outgrowth. And that is what we see in the book of Genesis. From Jacob's 12 sons who come down with their families to Egypt, we see great increase. Okay? So what can we make of this? Prediction and fulfillment. In Genesis, this is predicted. In Exodus, it has come to pass. So not only do we have this in a particular case, but we might say that this is one of the themes of biblical literature, that which is predicted to come in God's hands and in God's good time does come to pass. So back to Exodus chapter 1, verse 7. But the Israelites were fertile and prolific. Uvenei Yisrael, paru v'yishritzu v'yirbu, fertile and prolific, multiplied and increased very greatly. Let's go back to Genesis chapter 1. You see what I'm driving at here. Genesis chapter 1, verse 22. And God blessed them, the creatures, saying, be fertile and increase. Vayavarech otam Elohim lemor, peru urvu, be fertile and multiply. Verse 28, to human beings. God blessed them, and God said to them, peru urvu umilu et haaretz, be fertile and multiply and fill the earth. What can we make of this? That the story of the people in Egypt is a new creation story. The allusions to Genesis and the command to be fruitful and multiply are now happening among the Israelites. Okay? So, where are the creation stories in the Bible? Well, we have two of them. Genesis chapter 1 and Exodus chapter 1. Or to extend that idea, the creation of Israel as a nation, not just as a family, is a kind of microcosm of the creation of the universe. Or to put it differently, the creation of Israel, the people, is the story of the universe in human form. This is a new creation and a new beginning for humanity. So the author of Exodus, in appealing to Genesis, is elevating the story of Egypt, the creation, the flourishing, the destruction, or the near destruction of Israel and Egypt, is a new kind of beginning for humanity. Okay? So, I think what's so interesting about it is, if you read the first chapter of the book of Exodus, it looks like the unfolding of a story, which it is. But not too beneath the surface are deep allusions to larger issues. Okay? It's as if to say that God created the universe and the universe sustains itself or is sustained. Analogously, God created the Israelites, and they will be sustained too, even though they will face one difficulty and threat to their existence after another. As long as there's a universe, there will, by analogy, be the Israelites and their descendants. So the author here has packed lots of echoes into a kind of straightforward genealogical introduction. Let's go back to Exodus, verse 8. A new king arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph. We do know that the 19th dynasty of Egyptian pharaohs went from about 1290 before the Common Era for another 100 years. And the great pharaoh was Ramses II. Ramses II reigned for 66 years, 1290 to, what would that be? 1290 to 1224, something like that. When I think about long reigns, I think of Franz Joseph I of Austria, who reigned from 1848 to 1918, 70 years. By the way, just as a big aside, those of you who are following what's going on at Severance Hall know that this week the orchestra is playing both the couple of Schuberts and the Alban Berg lyric suite. Alban Berg had an affair with a woman whose name was Hannah Fuchs Robaten. Hannah happens to have been, according to strong rumors, the illegitimate child of Franz Joseph I of Austria. So that, and she herself was the sister of Franz Werfel, who was the third husband of Alma, who married Mahler and Gropius and then Werfel. So the story surrounding Berg's lyric suite is also quite fascinating. Okay, what Ramses II did was he moved the center of the empire to the Delta region and began to build big buildings to solidify his realm. That may be a background for what we see here. In other words, we're just not sure about the historicity of this story. There's no evidence in the Sinai of any Israelites at all. I mean, if the Israelites lived in the wilderness in the Sinai region for 40 years with all the pack animals and all the things you would think there would be some archaeological evidence, and there isn't any. So that makes the story seem fictional. On the other hand, it seems to have a kind of historical basis to it, where a pharaoh is building the monuments of his reign just when the Israelites are conscripted into this kind of public servitude. Maya?
This is a total digression, but going back to verse 7, the Hebrew is Upnei Israel, etc., etc. The English version is but the Israelites, and I was wondering why.
Oh.
So the Hebrew says, and the Israelites were fertile. The translation said, but the Israelites were fertile, and I don't understand why.
That's a good question. I don't have a great answer to that. Verse 6, Joseph died, and all his brothers, and all that generation. So I guess I'm going to try out an answer, an explanation. So there's death in verse 6, and everybody died. On the other hand, that wasn't the end. But the Israelites were fertile and prolific, undaunted, undeterred by the death of one generation because another generation comes along. But as Maya points out, the translation but is not inevitable. The the vav, can be translated in a variety of ways, depending upon, I don't know, the insights of the translator. And so, but needs an explanation, because it could be and I've tried one out. Verse 8, a new king arose over Egypt who didn't know Joseph, and he said to his people, look, the Israelite people are much too numerous for us. The be fruitful and multiply has come home to roost, so to speak. Now they're a threat. Let us deal shrewdly with them so that they may not increase. Otherwise, in the event of war, they may join our enemies in fighting against us and rise from the ground. So they set taskmasters over them to oppress them with forced labor. This is not household domestic slavery. This is public servitude, where you're forced to do work without remuneration. And they built garrison cities for Pharaoh, Pithom and Ramses. But the more they were oppressed, the more they increased and spread out, so that the Egyptians came to dread the Israelites. It's another very fascinating theme, right? That this group seems to be able to resist oppression and to struggle for, my words, to struggle for survival. Jim?
But it also subtly points out that over all these years, they were not assimilated.
Yeah. Yeah, there you go. That's true. Right. I mean, later on in Exodus, it says they were in Egypt for 400 years, and this is the end of that period because Moses comes along right away. So it's this generation that is finally going to be liberated. So they've lived in Egypt for, from the Bible's point of view, a silent 400 years, and yet they still exist, not only exist, but as a coherent collective. So, of course, this is a invitation for Midrash. How is it that they were able to survive? This is a good example of the need for Midrash. Midrash is not just something that people play around with because they have nothing else to do, and so fancifully they engage in these interpretations. If you take the Bible in a literal or figurative sense as the Word of God, then gaps need to be filled in because the story is incomplete. By the way, Heschel says something like, speaking of the Word of God, that it's not that we believe the Bible is God's Word. The Bible is sacred because God gave it. We say that God gave it because the Bible is sacred. It's not that we think of the sacredness of the Bible because of its origin as an assertion. God gave the Bible. Rather, we look at the Bible and see what a spectacular document it is from which we infer that God gave it. The Bible is divine. That we know by reading it. We don't deduce its divinity because of who gave it, but the other way around. And this is a good example of that idea, that if we look at a text, if we look at the marriage of Figaro, we know that the composer had to be extraordinary. It's not that we start with Mozart is extraordinary, and therefore the marriage of Figaro must be. We start by looking at the thing itself and deduce the quality of its creator. And here is a good example of how Midrash, what animates Midrash, that this text is sacred. All we need to do is look carefully at it. We can start by looking at it. From that, we deduce its divine origin and therefore its need to fill in the blanks to be sure that what's not said is brought into the light of day. And Jim pointed in that direction. How were they able to survive? Which raises an awfully good issue for any generation. What are the elements that make for survival of any people? Because the forces of assimilation are always centrifugal. We fly away from the center as we leave our community in one way or another. And I think the rabbis say they survived by doing two things: circumcising their sons and giving their children Hebrew names. You think I'm wrong about that, Jordan?
Isn't there a point where they say they circumcised all the men because they hadn't been circumcised?
Well, that's right. In the book of Joshua, once they get to the promised land, they circumcise them because they hadn't been, as well as not having celebrated a Passover until they get there. Joshua chapter 3 or something like that. Right. I don't know that it's here, but the Midrash may say it. I mean, in a few chapters, Zipporah circumcises somebody in a very mysterious passage. That doesn't imply that there were no circumcisions before, but the attention is drawn to it. Malcolm?
Could you tie the title Shmot to what you were just speaking about?
Could I tie what?
The word Shmot, the title of this chapter.
Right. Yeah, Shmot means names. And it's a genitive form, a construct form in Hebrew. The names of, what more might there be to...
The significance of this entire and important chapter, you just spoke about the ability to continue the people
Okay. Of the importance of naming, and here are the names. Good, yeah. And of course, the name of the book comes from the first significant word. So this is Sefer, the book of Shmot. So even that word becomes very important in labeling. Notice, by the way, this is not part of Malcolm's question, but it points us back to the very beginning. The first word of the book of Genesis is Va'ela, and these. And you notice that the first letter is the word and, v, which suggests that this is a continuation of something that went before. So the vav points out that we're not dealing here with an isolated book, but the continuation of the story of Genesis. I think most Torahs, each column begins with a vav, and the vav Torahs, which also suggests that each column is a continuation of one before. But I think more significantly, you can't isolate a column and lift it out of the whole. The vav is always going to tell you, this is just continuing what went before. Pay attention to what went before, and don't just isolate one story or one after another. Doris?
Well, another reason they survive is because they're strong. The men are strong mentally and physically.
Good.
Because the women are going to be strong too.
Yes.
In the next section.
So everybody is strong. The men
Well, that's important for survival.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Right. The power to resist, the power to imagine.
Yeah, but also physically.
Physical. Right. Good. Great.
I think that these people increase, because just like all slaves, the people that own them, they're valuable to them. They want them to increase.
Yeah.
And they don't, they're forcing them to increase until it gets to the point where they become a danger to them.
That's a good point. So that the very need for workers on the part of the Egyptians
Free labor.
makes them strong in service to the Egyptians, but also in the capacity to resist the Egyptians. I think that's good. That's sort of the irony here that we find. Yeah. All right, let's go on. Verse 13. Well, verse 12. But the more they were oppressed, the more they increased and spread out, so that the Egyptians came to dread the Israelites. The Egyptians ruthlessly imposed upon the Israelites the various labors that they made them perform. Ruthlessly, they made life bitter for them with harsh labor at mortar and bricks and with all sorts of tasks in the field. The king of Egypt spoke to the Hebrew midwives. Now, it's not clear how to translate that. Is it the Hebrew midwives, or is it the midwives of the Hebrews? Are they Israelites or are they not? And commentators disagree about this. I think the Septuagint, Josephus, Abravanel say they're Egyptians. Others say they're Hebrews. I like that they're Egyptians, because we have a very strong form of civil disobedience here. The king of Egypt spoke to the Hebrew midwives, one of whom was named Shiphrah and one Puah. The problem with that interpretation I just gave is that the names are Hebrew names. Saying, when you deliver the Hebrew women, look at the birth stool. If it's a boy, kill him. If it's a girl, let her live. The midwives, fearing God, did not do as the king of Egypt had told them. They let the boys live. Okay, so this very interesting phrase, fearing God. I think it's Sarna who says that fearing God means conscience. It's not a kind of ritual idea, but a matter of following the dictates that one has created in one's own mind and conscience. So these are women who go against the the throne, and the asymmetry of power. I mean, these are just a couple of ordinary women over and against the great throne, the great empire. So what do we have here? We have the second form of resistance. We have the Israelites in verse 12 becoming a threat to the Pharaoh. And of course, we'll see that the threat increases. Now we have from within the community of the Egyptians itself, those who are willing to resist. So the book of Exodus is a book of liberation by God, but it's also an act of liberation from the resources that people have. This is one of the things, Doris, you said, physical strength. Here we find it to be moral strength. So in a certain way, it's easy to overstate this. This is a foreshadowing of the defeat of Pharaoh and the Egyptians. We already see it in miniature, we might say, in a particular instance, which will then burst on the scene more generally in a little bit. So that this is a simple story, intelligible, understandable, but buried just below the surface are all kinds of interesting themes. It's specific. Actually, it reminds me of a concept by the philosopher Hegel. Hegel talks about the concrete universal. How do we get the universal, something general, in the concrete? The answer is, a story brilliantly told. Because here the author is delighting us, stories entertain, stories elicit our interest. How are we going to first elicit the interest of the audience before we give the audience something profound? If you go right to the profundity, if I came to my Devar Torah one Friday night and opened Hegel's Phenomenology of the Spirit, I would have profundity but no interest. I'd better start with a story, and if I think Hegel's got something to tell us, slip that into the narrative so that the narrative vibrates a little bit. And this narrative does vibrate, doesn't it? The midwives, verse 17, fearing God, did not do as the king of Egypt had told them. So they let the boys live. So the king of Egypt summoned the midwives and said to them, why have you done this thing, letting the boys live? And the midwives said to Pharaoh, now they make up a story, because the Hebrew women, so they're also strong of mind and imagination, because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women. They are vigorous. Before the midwife can come to them, they have given birth. And God dealt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied and increased greatly. Okay? And because the midwives feared God, he established households for them. And here in the footnote, meaning of Hebrew, batim, houses, uncertain. Did he create for them the durability of subsequent generations? Is that what houses mean? Was it certain wealth? Was it status, protection? It's hard to know. Then Pharaoh charged all his people, saying, every boy that is born you shall throw into the Nile, but let every girl live. So this is the third attempt to domesticate, to conquer the Israelites, first by hard labor, then through the midwives, and now through the plan of killing the children. The boys. A certain man of the house of Levi. So now the author surprises us by shifting gears. Now all of a sudden we have a domestic scene. But of course the author has something powerful up the author's sleeve, because here comes the beginnings of the redemption of the people. Maybe we've already seen it foreshadowed, but now here it is specifically. A certain man of the house of Levi went and married a Levite woman. The woman conceived and bore a son, and when she saw how beautiful he was, she hid him for 3 months. Obviously, this is Moses. According to the story, where is Moses in the birth order? According to this little narrative beginning, where is he? First. Pardon me? First. The story opens with the birth of a child, and it's easy to infer that Moses is first. Of course, Moses is third. Aaron and Miriam are older. So the author is not simply interested in chronicling the story. The author is interested in the meaning of the story. So the author jumps right away to the most important of the children, even though Aaron and Miriam play considerable roles. But the author, once again, I remember listening to a lecture on radio many years ago, and the commentator got on maybe before the lecture and said, "You will see here evidence of a mind at work," right? We infer mental dexterity. And we see it here, don't we? The author knows exactly what the author is up to at this point, and not just giving us the facts in an order in which it might be possible. So she hid him. When she could hide him, verse 3, no longer, she got a wicker basket for him and caulked it with bitumen and pitch. She put the child into it and placed it among the reeds by the bank of the Nile. Verse 3. When she was able to protect him no longer, she brought for him a batikachlo tevat gomer. This is an ark. A teva is an ark. Okay. We have not the aron, the ark, this ark, but we have the ark that is kind of a device to float and so on, right? I'm sorry? Well, I was just going to say, the only other use of this is the Noah's Ark. Noah was saved by God, protected by God, in order to usher in the next era of humanity. Noah is both saved by God and a new beginning. Okay? So to use the very same word for Moses suggests both of these things. This is the saved Redeemer idea. The Redeemer threatened who is saved miraculously, but also who ushers in a new beginning. Moses is a new beginning in the history of humanity, and it's captured here very adroitly by the author's use of the word ark, referring back to Noah.
Is that why we call this an ark, to protect the Torah?
Well, it's a different word. It's an aron, a closet. It does protect and gives dignity and status to it, but the words are different, so you could say what you've said, and it's true, but you couldn't infer it from the Noah or the Moses story. She put the child into it, the middle of verse 3, placed it among the reeds by the bank of the Nile, and his sister stationed herself at a distance to learn what would befall him. The daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe in the Nile. Well, how fortuitous. Just where Moses is, there comes Pharaoh's daughter. Why? You remember when Abraham sends his assistant to get a wife for Isaac, and he just happens to come to the place where Rebekah is? Or when Joseph is looking for the brothers, he just happens to come across a person who knows where the brothers have gone? Twilight Zone moments, right? The hand of God at work. So one interpretation of this might be this is another example of the hand of God in a way helping the story along. but it also can be the insight, the activity of Moses' mother, who has scouted out the area and who has come to recognize where Pharaoh's daughter comes to bathe. So it can be one of, or both of these two things. Once again, though, the latter interpretation is just another example of the cleverness of human beings able to manage their own activities and behavior. So verse 5 again. The daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe in the Nile while her maidens walked along the Nile. She spied the basket among the reeds and sent her slave girl to fetch it. When she opened it, she saw that it was a child, a boy, crying. She took pity on it and said, now this to me is one of the most poignant moments in the Bible. I mean, here we have an individual, Pharaoh's daughter, from the very center, the palace of the tyranny. To whom does she have her primary loyalty? Of course, to her father and to Egypt. And yet she's able to have pity on a child whom she recognizes as a Hebrew child. Okay? So that one could say that Pharaoh's daughter, unnamed, is able to transcend the elements of her social and political life. She's able to allow a strong emotion to transcend the conventions of her society. Or to put it maybe more provocatively, here again we see the foreshadowing of the overthrow of Pharaoh. Because right here, Pharaoh's child surpasses his expectations. She saw, and she took pity on it and said, this must be a Hebrew child, which does suggest, of course it suggests some kind of, no, I guess it doesn't. I was going to say some identifying mark on the child, and it could be the circumcision. On the other hand, couldn't it be that she recognizes that the Israelites are in danger and that this is likely some individual in Israelite society who's being hidden from the Pharaoh? Isn't that possible? So I like to think that her pity is more poignant if she recognizes that it's an Israelite, and recognizing it because of some mark on that boy. But the other is possible too. Then his sister, verse 7, said to Pharaoh's daughter, shall I go and get you a Hebrew nurse to suckle the child for you? And Pharaoh's daughter answered, yes. And by the way, Doris's point a minute ago about physical strength and the physical strength of the men and the women, here I think we don't see necessarily physical strength, but a kind of mental acuity, the capacity to plan, to devise a strategy to try to overcome the tyranny. And right here at the beginning, we have 5 extremely strong women, don't we? We have Pharaoh's daughter, we have Moses' mother, Moses' sister, and the 2 midwives. So let's call this the anticipation of the overthrow of the tyranny, the foreshadowing, in a way, the victory already underway. And it's facilitated by women in a story otherwise dominated by men, right? Moses and Aaron. All the kings of ancient Israel, north and south but one, were men. It is a patriarchal society, and yet from time to time, the power of women within that society is made manifest. And most spectacularly, it seems to me, in the story in which liberation, death or life, is most at stake, in the paradigm example of the need for human volition and strength and planning, We have 5 women doing the work of overcoming Pharaoh by way of anticipation. So, I mean, I think it's, when we think of the Bible as patriarchal, we have to think of 2 things. Yes, it is. But there's also what Freud called the return of the repressed. There is a I don't want to say this is an anticipation of women's liberation, but it certainly is a recognition of the power of the Spirit distributed, if not equally quantitatively, qualitatively, over men and women. So there is another kind of overcoming in this story, the overcoming of the limitations of the patriarchy. There's that liberation too. Amy?
Yes. This might be a stretch to,
Speak louder, please.
going back to Genesis.
Yes?
And when man is created, the words are that we should rule the earth, be master it, and fill the earth.
Yes.
It doesn't say our master over the fish and the seas and all things that creep.
Ah.
It doesn't say master over other people.
Ah.
And so if we fast forward to Exodus, what you're describing is a twisting. These women are not slaves to the master, the Pharaoh. They are mastering their universe.
Oh, I see what you mean. Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it. The earth here meaning the environment, their environment, which the women are able to master.
And it doesn't say mastering other human beings.
Yeah, oh, that's a good point. That's a nice point.
It says things that creep.
Be a master of your situation, not necessarily other people, is what you're saying. I like that. Wow. Yeah, very good. I'm so glad I called on you.
I'm glad you didn't kick me out.
Amy is also on poetry, and often her screen is at the corner of the screen, and I often don't see it until somebody says, Amy has her hand up, so it's gotten to be a little joke for us. Stuart?
By the same token, Rebecca deceives Isaac. And I think it's a sign that women and the subsequent children all are secondary creatures.
Secondary in what sense? Secondary to men?
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
the Bible is primarily a book of male power, but women and their children
Yes?
become the heroes.
Would you alter that from the heroes to among the heroes?
No,
No. Women are the heroes of the Bible, is your claim.
yes,
Not the men?
not the men.
Well,
The men write.
that's a blow. That's,
The men write the history,
okay.
but the women are major players.
That's so interesting. Oh, major players I could certainly go along with. So what you seem to be saying is that those who write the history give themselves a prominence that they really don't deserve comparatively.
Yes.
How misguided. Well, yeah. Well, that's a very strong statement. In my view, it's overly strong, but that doesn't mean that the women don't play a fundamental role. Deborah, Hannah, Bathsheba. I mean, Bathsheba is the one who really gets the crown for her son Solomon. So there are extremely strong and consequential women in the Bible, along with consequential men.
I think the men are given credit for what the women do.
Wow, okay, very good. Oh my gosh. We may have to have a seating plan here. Those who think that the men, oh my gosh. Okay, so that's a powerful comment. Frankly, I think you overstated, but I mean, we can overstate the role of the patriarchy, and that's where we want to kind of erode that sense that that's all it is, because there is, in my language, a counter-narrative at work here against a patriarchal society. Malcolm?
Well, to lean on this point just a little bit more, and I'm not taking a side between you and Stuart, but
You'd be wise to take a side.
well, let's see where I wind up.
Okay.
This is a palace revolt
Yeah.
underway.
Yes.
I mean, the daughter of the king,
Yeah.
who is not named, we don't know her name.
That's it.
But she is, through this act, sowing the seeds of the overthrow of the king, the divine king of
Yeah.
Egypt.
Yeah.
So it's not a small matter of what's happened, and she should be wise to the fact that she is clearly going against her father.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
But he is also unnamed.
He's also a name. Because Pharaoh, the word Pharaoh, I think, means the house. So it stands for the dynasty. But it's probably Ramses, if we want to go to history. Yeah. Malcolm, would you be willing to adjust your statement from sowing the seeds to foreshadowing? You think she has a causative role here, or is this just an example of what's going to happen in a bigger sense soon?
Well, there's a divine author here at work, but this just doesn't seem to be happenstance.
This doesn't seem to
None
be.
of this seems to be happenstance.
No, that's for sure. So you're moving toward a kind of a causative. God's plan is at work, and she's part of the plan, which is the unfolding cause and consequence. Okay, all right. Yeah. However we understand this, it's extremely rich, isn't it? This is a master storyteller. Let's go on. Now, verse 7, we already did that. So, take this child, verse 9, and Pharaoh's daughter said to her, it's interesting, I just noticed this for the first time. She's always called Pharaoh's daughter, which I think also makes this point that Pharaoh's daughter who happens to be rebelling against him. So the idea of Pharaoh's daughter suggests possession. He owns her. That's her basic description, adjective. She's the daughter. And yet, that's not true. She stands against him. Take this child, and Pharaoh's daughter said to her, take this child and nurse it for me, I'll pay your wages. So the woman took the child and nursed it. When the child grew up, she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, who made him her son. Okay, so Moses is raised in two cultures. By his mother, the Hebrew culture, and then at a certain point in Egyptian society. She named him Moses, explaining, I drew him out of water. Of course, I mean, that's a fanciful etymology. The word Moses in Egyptian means born or son, and is often used as a suffix, tut Moseh, Ach Moseh, the son of. But here, the Hebrew author gives it a Hebrew etymology. I drew him out of water. the saved Redeemer. So, now the priest of Midian had 7 daughters. They came to draw water, filled the troughs, but shepherds came and drove them off. Moses rose to their defense. He watered their flock. Already in anticipation of Moses' role as liberator, when they returned to their father Reuel, he said, "How is it that you come back so soon today?" They answered, "An Egyptian rescued us from the shepherds." She recognizes him as an Egyptian. "He even drew water for us, watered the flock." He said to his daughters, "Where is he then? Why did you leave the man? Ask him to break bread." Moses consented to stay with the man, and he gave Moses his daughter Zipporah as a wife. She bore a son whom she named Gershom, etymology, stranger, Ger, Sham, there. For he said, "I've been a stranger in a foreign land." The King James says it more eloquently, right? A stranger in a strange land. A long time after that, the king of Egypt died. The Israelites were groaning under the bondage, cried out, and their cry for help from the bondage rose up to God. I think this is the first moment since before the story of Joseph that God is seen in the Bible as an actor. God is referred to over and over again, and certainly Joseph said, "You meant it for evil to the brothers, but God meant it for good." Joseph is inferring that God is an actor, but we don't see directly that God said this, that, or the other. So not only are the Israelites in Egypt for 400 years, God, in a way, the Israelites are in exile, we might say, and God is out of the picture too. Unless, as we've been doing this morning, isn't this God's hand at work? Okay? And the Bible makes us think periodically that God doesn't need to be brought into the light of day as an actor to be referred to as an actor in the story. Sort of an interesting idea, isn't it? I mean, it's one thing to say explicitly, God said this, God did that, and another thing to say, we find God's hand at work in this story. The first is direct action. The other is, let me put it this way, philosophy. That's the world I think I'm living in, where God is an actor in the story. I don't see God's hand at work. I don't see the big miracles. I mean, after all, if the sea is split, you don't have to say God did it to know that God did it. To see the birth of a baby, you could say this is a miracle, but you could also say it's science. It depends on how you choose to understand the world you live in. So it strikes me that inferring God's hand at work is a move of reflection. I'm going to work on that. So a long time after that, verse 23, the king of Egypt died. The Israelites were groaning under the bondage and cried out, and their cry for help from bondage rose up to God, and God heard their moaning, active verb, and God remembered, another active verb, his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. God looked upon the Israelites, and God took notice of them. That's extremely rich, isn't it? Here comes back into play the covenant. That somehow, why did God burst into activity here? Well, several possibilities. God saw the suffering, and he decided to get up and act. It was a pure act of volition. I'm deciding to act. But it could also be that God said, wait a minute here. I'm in a bargain with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I have a responsibility. And responsibility is a response to some situation prior to your acceptance of responsibility. Either God got up and said, I'm going to do it, or God said, wait a minute. I have an obligation here, and this is the moment to deploy it. God remembered his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. God looked upon the Israelites, and God took notice of them. Boy, if you made a film out of it, and you were able to have God sitting in his chair, and all of a sudden, oh my gosh, wait a minute here. There's something I must do because I made a bargain. God gets up and it begins to act. Now Moses, tending the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian, Jethro is also Reuel. That's how he is named here back in verse 18. Drove the flock into the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. Horeb is Sinai. An angel of the Lord appeared to him in a blazing fire out of a bush. He gazed, and there was a bush all aflame, and yet the bush was not consumed. Okay. Generally, a fire needs substance to be sustained. Here the fire doesn't burn the substance, doesn't consume the substance, and therefore something strange is going on here. And one of them may be that fire is an apt metaphor for God, who is not dependent upon the substance for what God does. In a way, the fire is independent of the substance because the substance doesn't burn up. I'm not sure if that's right, but something is going on here. By the way, the motto of the Jewish Theological Seminary is "on fire but not consumed," something like that, a motto for the Jewish people by JTS. I didn't get it exactly right, but something like that. Moses said, I must turn aside to look at this marvelous sight. Why doesn't the bush burn up? So what do we learn about Moses here? I'm sorry? He's curious. Right. He asks a question. Why? As if the word skeptic in Greek means to look at. A skeptic takes the trouble to look at what's going on and not just see it through accustomed eyes. And that's what Moses does here. There's something about this scene which puts pressure on his expectation. And therefore, he takes another look. I don't know if one wants to go so far as to say he is skeptical. Maybe he is skeptical. He expects one thing. It's not happening. He doubts somehow his accepted understanding. Something should be burned up, consumed, so I'm going to look at it. So curiosity, maybe even skepticism, which is so interesting in the basic hero of biblical religion, who is able to be skeptical about what is happening in front of him. Faith and doubt. I don't know, doubt, something like that. Moses said, I must turn aside to look at this marvelous sight. Why doesn't the bush burn up? And then the next verse I think is so spectacular. What's God's reaction to this? Two possible reactions at least. Why are you doubting the workings of my world? Or, thank you for being curious. Not only is this something you're capable of doing, this is the chief thing that you're able to do. You're able to look at a situation and be curious about it and try to dig deeper because there's something in it you don't believe. Yeah, right. What does Emily Dickinson say? I believe and doubt 100 times an hour. Doubt keeps faith nimble. Doubt serves faith to keep it from becoming rigid, habituated, automatic. When the Lord saw he had turned aside to look, God called him out of the bush. So in a certain way, God is testing Moses. Moses, Moses, and he answered him, Hineni, here I am. And he said, don't come closer. Remove your sandals from your feet, for the place on which you stand is holy ground. I am, he said, the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. It's, I think, very powerful moment, because God is both helpful and wants to be a part of the story, but also there's something fearsome about God, right? Be afraid in the presence of God. Take off your shoes, you're on holy ground. There's something dangerous here. And so you've got to act accordingly. We don't think of God as dangerous, but I think the Bible has this sense that one of the chief attributes of God is power, and power is neutral. It can help or it can hurt. It can give us aid or it can strike out at us if we don't treat it in a certain way. And the Lord continued, verse 7, I've marked well the plight of my people in Egypt, have heeded their outcry because of their taskmasters. Yes, I'm mindful of their sufferings. I've come down to rescue them from the Egyptians and to bring them out of that land to a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey, the region of the Canaanites. So I think this is the first time a land flowing with milk and honey appears in the Bible. The region of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. It's not an empty land. It's a land filled with people, ripened people, civilizations with their own mores and customs and so on. Now the cry of the Israelites has reached me. Moreover, I've seen how the Egyptians oppress them. Come therefore, I will send you to Pharaoh, and you shall free my people, the Israelites, from Egypt. And in verse 11, Moses said, yes, I'm ready. Not really. So Moses is the paradigm reluctant prophet, right? I mean, we see it certainly in Jeremiah. Who else do we see it in? I don't know. Amos, Jonah, very good, absolutely. Amos says, I'm not a prophet nor the son of a prophet. I didn't choose this. God grabbed me by the nape of my neck, and here I am. I don't know, but Jonah's, I think, the great example. Because prophecy is a tough vocation. The prophet is caught in the middle between the people and God, between the emotions, the needs of the people, and the commandments, the demands of God. And the prophet, in a way, is a communication individual between God and the people, bringing God's word to the people, bringing the people's needs to God. Tough place to be. But Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and free the Israelites from Egypt? It's a good thing for a prophet to say. I'm humble. Oh, thank you very much for making me the captain of the entire school. I must be really great. Yes. And let everybody celebrate my virtues. No, who am I? So the prophet needs to be humble because the prophet isn't God. The prophet serves God. Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and free the Israelites from Egypt? And he said, I will be with you. And that shall be the sign that it was I who sent you. And when you have freed the people from Egypt, you shall worship God at this mountain. That's a little That's a little mysterious, actually. What's the sign? Is the sign that you will come to Sinai, and after the fact, it will prove that I'm the one who called you? I don't quite get what the sign is. I will be with you. That shall be the sign. Moses said to God, when I come to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is his name? What shall I say to them? More skepticism or more reluctance. And God said to Moses, Ehyeh asher ehyeh. I will be what I will be. I am that what I am. And he continued, thus you shall say to the Israelites, Ehyeh, I am, sent me to you. I am the one who exists. Don't try to hem me in with attributes. I mean, God is the first existentialist, isn't it? He exists before his essence. That's what existentialism is. Essentialism is, when I'm born, I already have an essence. Aristotle's comment that we are rational animals. I didn't create my reason. I didn't decide to be reasonable. That's who I am. My essence precedes my existence. Existentialism is the existence precedes essence, that I make what I am. It's all up to me. And God is existent, the existent. Yeah, God has no essence. God is free. Is that possible?
Thomas says his essence is his existence.
His essence is his existence. Good. Well, that's the I am. All that we need to say about God is, God is. Something like that. Very good. And God further said to Moses, thus you shall speak to the Israelites. The Lord, what's the footnote say here? Oh, the name, I see what you're saying. Read Adonai. The Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God and Isaac and the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. That's a very interesting. God has said to Moses, Moses says, what's your name? I am what I am. Ehyeh asher ehyeh. Or shorthand, Ehyeh. That's abstract. What Moses says to the people is that God is the God of history, the one who chose Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, which is much more God is the God of our history, of our tradition, and not this abstract philosophical, I'm existence. This shall be my name forever, this my appellation for all eternity. Yeah, which is the name for all eternity? I am, or I am the God of your ancestors? Yeah. Okay, so Moses has expressed two moments of reluctance. Who am I? Who are you? And God has answered both cryptically. I will be with you. You'll see that when we get to Sinai. Take it for granted. When you get there, that will confirm it. And I am existence. Maybe I've over-philosophized it. I don't know. Yes, Maya.
The Hebrew says, Ehyeh asher ehyeh, which means I will be whatever I will be. So what does that say about God? Like he's developing, he's not a closed unit, he's also might evolve.
Evolving, yeah. I remember Bill Morris of blessed memory, sit right there, would always come up after and say, God is on a journey as well. And then you're making that point. I think another way of looking at it, not to undermine that way, is that God is free. You can't say what I will be. I will be what I will be. Yeah. Well, that's the same thing, I guess. Right. God is evolving. Go and assemble the Israelites, verse 16. Say to them, Lord God of your fathers, Abraham and Jacob, has appeared to me and said, I've taken note of you and what is being done to you in Egypt, and I have declared I will take you out of the misery of Egypt to the land of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, to a land flowing with milk and honey. So there's the second milk and honey in this chapter. They will listen to you. Then you shall go to the elders of Israel, go with the elders of Israel to the king of Egypt, and you shall say to him, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, manifested himself to us. I wonder how well that will go over with Pharaoh. Now therefore let us go a distance of 3 days into the wilderness to sacrifice to the Lord our God. Yet I know that the king of Egypt will let you go only because of a greater might. We're in for a struggle. So I will stretch out my hand and smite Egypt with various wonders which I will work upon them. After that he shall let you go. And I will dispose the Egyptians favorably toward this people, so that when you go, you will not go away empty-handed. Each woman shall borrow from her neighbor and the lodger in her house objects of silver and gold, clothing, and you shall put these on your sons and daughters, thus stripping the Egyptians. Okay. So God actually lays out the story that is to follow. But, and just another verse or two, but Moses spoke up and said, what if they don't believe me and don't listen to me, but say, the Lord did not appear to you? So this is the third attempt to get out of the mission. The first is, who am I? The second is, who are you? The third is, what about the people? Finally, in desperation, in verse 10, Moses says, please, O Lord, I've never been a man of words, either in time past or now that you have spoken. I'm slow of speech. So the fourth attempt is, I may be your person, but I don't know how to do this. Choose somebody else. At that point, God gets angry. Verse 14, the Lord became angry with Moses, and he said, there's your brother Aaron the Levite, and so on. So really a spectacle of reluctance in its many forms. I mean, the author has a good understanding, a good feel for how difficult not only Moses' role is going to be, but by anticipation, the role of the prophet is really a very, very difficult role. I've got a bar mitzvah to conduct, so we're going to stop. I will see you next week. We made it through quite a bit of this parsha. Extremely rich, don't you think? Shabbat shalom.
Elevate themselves over the women.
because I don't know who's there.
But she said that she was real excited, and they're going over to her son and daughter-in-law's dinner last night to celebrate their love. Oh, good. So that was good. So I have an idea for a new poem for Purim. I wanted to check an idea with the rabbi because maybe you know. It's also called, I mean, I'm just trying to think of something different. It's that I didn't use last year. It's also called the Festival of Lots, LOTS. And I've been reading to find out exactly what lots mean. I'm not sure I understand it completely. I'm thinking it's either a decision or a chance, but I'm not sure. And I'll check with the rabbi because I don't want to use it unless I really understand the term. Okay, but I'll come up with something different. Yeah.
Use the same thing that way, nobody would do difference.
I'll try to, you challenge me, so I'll try to come up with something different.
Yeah, you told us about the Natasha and that.
I have so many things to talk about with Candy. And
What next week?
well, I'm not, I'm just trying to do what we can without her.
Okay.
So she's been responding to some emails that Sandy's even I have seen, so that's good.
But, I'm willing to help.
Oh, I know.
Whatever.
Now that they changed the age, because Cindy's on vacation. I was
Oh,
here.
Cindy's on vacation?
She's out this whole week. She'll be back the week after.
Yes, now what Amy and her obviously.
We asked Al, Cindy told us 253. Allison told us 350. And we don't know whether Cindy was just giving us numbers of families and not people.
I mean, that would be much more.
Oh, yeah, he's the one who brought it up.
Make the luncheons much more expensive.
And the luncheons are more expensive anyway because everything has gone up in price. I'm gonna take a look at it.
Very well. I was thinking about it. They were enough.
Oh, come on.
Yeah.
See what they're
It's gonna be nice. I did listen to the service online last night.
Dr. Rabbi,
I'm super impressed.
yeah, super impressed. He's been honored.
You want a bagel? Anybody?
Last night,
Is there a plain one?
Yeah.
last night he looked good.
I don't know.
I could do something else.
Oh, I think there's a lot more to it. Personally, I don't think he's there. I don't know. I think something else.
At the end of the 5 years, to take a sabbatical for a year.
Well, do you want a bagel?
But
You want a bagel?
if there's a plain one.
Drive safe. Thank
Are you going to his lecture tomorrow?
What is tomorrow?
Are you going to his talk tomorrow? Is there a talk tomorrow?
I think it was
Oh,
canceled.
that's right, it was canceled.
Yeah.
I saw it. What just happened? I don't know what, nobody's talking.
You know,